Welcome, folks. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for designing and testing your website like a UX designer. My name is Daniel Anzueto, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's session. If this is your first time attending one of our workshops, let me provide some context on Startout. Startout accelerates the growth of the LGBTQ plus community to drive its economic empowerment, building a world where every LGBTQ plus entrepreneur has equal access to lead, succeed, and shape the workforce of the future. I'm excited to welcome Alexis Warthen as co-founder of Rex Marketing and CX. They strive to assist small to medium businesses to grow their marketing strategies that fit their unique company goals. Over to you, Alexis.
Okay, thank you so much for the intro. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro about Rex as well, which is our company, but I'm so excited. I'm so excited to share with you designing and testing like a UX designer. This is something I'm super passionate about, so I'm just going to jump right in. Okay, there we go. 1 second. Technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. What we're going to discuss today, we're going to just give, like I said, quick intro about Rex. I'm going to talk about what UX even is if we're not really sure, and then steps of UX for your site, which is why we're all here, and then some general UX UI tips. I'm going to give you guys a bunch of resources because there's no way I can cover everything UX in an hour. And then we're going to do a Q&A, and I'm going to give you some information on how to get in touch if you have further questions. Why is my thing doing that? Okay. So just a quick rundown of Rex. This was founded by myself and my co-founder, Ryan Ward. He is actually a board member at Startout, so that's really exciting. He's pretty new to that, but he has a background in all things marketing. He's like a marketing guru. He has done his own company before, so this is actually his second company, but his first one was actually acquired, which is awesome. And then he has also done like little small businesses. He has done, startup businesses, just all the things. And as you know, you wear a lot of hats when you're doing small business. So he has gotten his hands dirty in everything. And he just is the kind of person who will like get in and learn something and figure it out, which is why he is the best business partner I could ever ask for. Myself, I have a little bit of background in kind of a lot of things. I have some e-commerce, graphic design. I did graphic design for a couple years with the e-commerce. Learned graphic design is not my whole passion. Went back to school and actually got my master's in user experience design. I worked for a major company in the Austin area for 2.5 years, started Rex, and we really started Rex, and maybe this will resonate with some of you guys, because if you've ever worked a 9 to 5, you know that you're, doing a good job, right? You know that you're kind of putting your all into this company, and yet maybe you don't feel fulfilled. That's kind of where Ryan and I were. We sort of wanted to start something where we can really help other people and kind of give this purpose and this meaning behind what we're doing. And so that is really why we started Rex. That's kind of what we do. I'll give y'all a way to contact us later, but I know y'all aren't here for that. So let's just move into UX design. If my thing will let me, let's see, there we go. Okay, what is UX? UX is really the overall experience of a person using a product. So a UX designer is here to make sure that the person can navigate through the site and do it easily, smoothly, without pain points or frustrations. A UX designer is here to kind of think like the user, put themselves in their shoes, and then really make sure that the whole process is completely seamless. And we really want to do that because for your business, if you have a really nice usable website, people will purchase because they won't be frustrated, and they might come back because they know and they trust you already. So UX is great for the user, but it's also really great for your business because it really talks to the client kind of on their terms and in their language while they're using it. Because I know it may seem like a website is kind of this like static thing that you're looking at and interacting with, but it's really a conversation. And so just like a conversation, having a website give you feedback and respond, and if you take an action at just the right time, it's going to let you know you did a good job. And the user might be asking, can I do this? Do I do this here? And if the website's really beautifully designed and giving a lot of delight to your users, then they're going to know exactly what they can do. Oh yeah, I can do this here. Oh, this was the right move because it gave me feedback. So that's kind of what UX is. I do want to differentiate UX versus UI. UI is really, really commonly kind of intertwined with UX, but they are different. And that's because UX is kind of the architect of a website, talking about the information architecture, how people flow through, whereas UI is really focused on how it looks. If it's really beautifully designed, and if the color scheme is good, and the font, and if it's really talking about branding and, you know, giving all of those. So UI is, I'm kind of narrowing it down for this presentation. It's really a pretty broad topic in and of itself, but that's kind of the difference. UX is kind of the background, how things work. UI is the how things look. All right, let me check my notes. I want to make sure I'm giving you all the information and that I'm actually talking about everything. Okay, I think so. The only other thing I wanted to say here, though, actually, is that UX, if you're talking about building a house, how I said it was the architect, that would be UX, the architect who's designing the floor plan, making sure you have constraints, right? You're saying, okay, I know that it needs to be 3,000 square feet, which I wish I want a 3,000 square foot house right now, actually. And I know that it needs to be 5 bedrooms, 3 baths. So as a UX designer, I would take that information and I would build the house accordingly, fitting the constraints and the customer's needs. So if the homeowner is like, you know, has all these children, I might take that into account. I might think about how the children would affect how the household, you know, works and design for things like that. If that homeowner is in a wheelchair, I might make the doorways bigger. So it's really about building it for the person. And then the UI might be like an interior designer who comes in and makes sure like the tile is really nice and the backsplash matches and all that good stuff. Okay, so I just gave you what UX was. I know I'm just kind of rambling on and on, but there is some structure to this. So we're going to talk about the first step. I think a lot of people want to just get into design and they're like, oh yeah, just create a mock-up, create, you know, that final piece of the puzzle so it looks so nice and polished. But as a UX designer, I have learned you can't do that. You'll end up missing all of these steps, which will be critical information. So what you have to do first is plan. You have to immerse yourself completely into whatever project it is. So I'm assuming a lot of you are probably here because you're wanting to do your own website, and you're really trying to make it so that your industry website is polished and beautiful. You even then, even if you know everything about your own business, which you probably do, doing this kind of planning is probably going to really, really benefit you, even for your website. So, do you know your intended audience and your target demographic? You can do this in a multitude of ways. If you don't know, which maybe I'm kind of speaking to the choir, but if you don't know, check on your website's analytics if you already have one. Check on your social media, see how many, check on the demographics of who's following you and interacting with your content. Look at Google Analytics. And kind of any people who've purchased from you in the past, look at the demographics of that. Know who your target audience is so that you can start branding and creating a website that fits them. Because if your target audience is maybe 75 to 80-year-olds, you might want to really focus on accessibility, having larger text, a super simplified website, so that it's not very complex. And it's really going to change how you design. Okay, do you know your users' pain points, right? Their frustrations. Do you know where, and that doesn't have to just be on your website. That can be for the industry. That can be kind of more general. What are their frustrations when it comes to ordering a product online? If that's what kind of industry you're in. Do you know their motivations? So not just what sucks for them, but what they really want to do. What do they want to do with their life? What do they want to do with your product? Because that is what you're selling. You're selling that meeting of that goal. So what are their motivations? How can you help with them? And then how are they navigating your site? If they're here to accomplish a goal, what are they doing on your site? Do you know? Because if you do, you can kind of see where they're landing, when they're leaving, and all of the in between. All right, the second step, that's research and testing. Now, testing is a huge part of UX design, and I think it can get overlooked because you can kind of assume, oh, I think I know what my user wants. And I'm not blaming because I do it all the time. I know what they want. I'm a user. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It actually doesn't work that way at all. And I have dug myself into a hole when I was newer because I didn't take the time to do the research and the testing. So I'm going to give you 5 slides. There's a lot of information that's about to come your way. So it's okay if you're not understanding everything I'm saying, because what I'm going to do at the end is give you resources so you can really dive deeper. But if something that I say is kind of like clicking with you and you're like, oh, I think I should do that, I would just take a note so that you can look into it a little bit more. Because again, no way in an hour can I give you a rundown of everything I've learned about UX, but I really want to give you guys the basics and how to move forward from here. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about, surveys and feedback widgets. Most of you are probably familiar with this because I'm sure you've received some kind of like review, like you order something and then they say, hey, will you review this? And then you can do that just like that. Push of a button, maybe even add a couple comments. I will say surveys are really good, but they can be a thorn in my side because a lot of times when you have a small amount of time or a small budget, people will say, well, just do a bunch of surveys, just do a survey. And if they're great, they really are, but you don't get that kind of contextual information from when you're talking one-on-one to a client. A lot of times in a survey, people are actually experiencing it in the moment. And so they might tell you what they think they felt, but it's not always 100% accurate. And if you're doing close-ended questions, such as, rate this from a scale of 1 to 5 or something like that, then unfortunately, you're not getting kind of the background of why they're rating it. So I would suggest doing open-ended and closed-ended questions if you're gonna do a survey. And then other tips, keep your questions really short and make them really, really clear. Give progress feedback. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to give an example, actually, that might be easier, because if you have ever done a survey that doesn't tell you how long it's going to be, you're like, when does this end? And I think everyone has been there. So tell them up front, this is a 5-minute survey, and then give them what step they're on. So if they're on step 3 and there's 5, they know they can kind of, see how long this is going to take for them. If you are the one coming up with the wording, don't let bias alter that. That's really easy to do because, again, you kind of know which way you want them to lean, but try really, really hard to make your questions just very simple. Just ask a question without any bias. And then a feedback widget, that's really good for a quick little like, hey, I saw you use this feature, this one thing on my website. How did you feel about it? But they're not always good, again, for all of that behind the scenes information. Okay, that was a lot of information. Let's switch our brains a little bit and talk about competitor analysis. This is a great one, whether you have a website or not. And that's because what you're going to do with a competitor analysis is look at your competitors and analyze what they're doing and kind of see if they're doing things that you like. And if they're doing things that you don't, you can learn from that too. Typically, I do 3 to 5 sites and I comb through them. I take a bunch of notes and then I analyze that data later. This kind of depends on what exactly you're looking for. If you're looking for best practices of design, then you can look at a lot of different types of websites. But if you're looking for something that's very industry specific, such as how does this company organize their navigation, right? That top that typically you can click and have buttons and drop downs and all of the good things. If you're trying to figure out how they're categorizing that, maybe look at industry specific websites, comb through those, figure out what you like, what you don't. There's no right way to do this. I kind of throw it all in a document really messy unless I'm getting paid specifically to do a competitor analysis and hand that over as documentation for someone to go off of. Because if it's for me, the whole point of this is figuring out what I like and how I can be inspired by companies and how I can be like, oh, I'm not doing that. That's really bad. Okay. Usability testing, probably one of my favorites. The way that you can do usability testing is you take a couple participants in real life. These are real life participants, people who are users if you can. And you put them in a situation where you can see them. So Zoom or in person, and you can see their screen. They're actually going to be interacting with your product. So they're going to have tasks. You'll have to write out a script. I have resources for this and tasks beforehand. And you'll give them a task to complete. So that will be like, say you have a website for pet products. You can say, please add this harness to cart and check out, go through the checkout process. And then when you can see them actually doing this, and you can see how they're working on the screen, and if their face pinches, you can kind of see how they're thinking and if they're frustrated about something. Another thing good to do is, oh, I didn't realize that my thing was getting cut off. I'm having some technical difficulties with this, so that's frustrating, but it's okay. So get 3 to 5 participants, ask them to communicate with you as they go. So ask them to talk out loud. While they're going through, they can say something like, I'm really not sure how to add this to cart, or I'm really not sure how to get this pet harness because it's not in the category that I thought. So I'm kind of confused here. Now you can write that down, and that's a really good note for you to have, that maybe you need to check out how to redo your categorizing, or, well, I added it to the cart, but the checkout form just feels really long. I don't know if in real life, if I would continue, I think I would leave. Okay, perfect. Note that down. How do I shorten my checkout process? Can I make anything automated? So if they type in their zip code first, the city and state fills in for them. Can I do anything like that to make this process quicker? But really, you're just trying to uncover problems. You're trying to figure out exactly how you can help that specific task, feature, or your entire website get better. I would suggest having this happen every once in a while. If you have a website that you've had for years, do this now. See if you find out any good information. And if you don't have a website, don't fret, that's okay. You can create small sections of your website when you're just building it, or even draw on Post-it notes and see if you can have them figure out the flow. So lots of ways to do this. Again, there's resources for more information. Card sorting. Okay, there's 5 of these, so we're on 4. I know that there's a lot of information. Card sorting is something that I love to do for new websites. And you can do this if you're trying to switch up your navigation. If you're realizing people are leaving or getting confused, you can do this as well. So card sorting is whenever you literally get Post-it notes. I'm a Post-it note girly. I love them. I have like 40 in front of me right now. Post-it notes you write categories on them, and then you present them to a possible user or a participant, and then you say, will you categorize these? So I like to do these for navigation items. In this example, you have dogs, pet health, and this isn't my way, pet accessories. And now you can write all these down and say, kind of organize them in the way that you think that the grouping makes sense. So for example, I might think dog toys goes under pet accessories. And if I were to just design my website based on what I think, that might not be the common consensus. Whereas if everyone is organizing dog toys under dogs, I'd confuse the heck out of some people, right? So that's why, again, you might not really know what your users are thinking, but by having this kind of data to go back on, you can really look and see, okay, I've done this for 5, 6 participants, and they all had the exact same responses, or most of them had the exact same responses, so I'm going to lean that way. I would definitely take pictures of this at the end because you will forget. So if they do the card sorting exercise, take a picture of it so you can have it to analyze later. And yeah, I think that card sorting is a great exercise to do for navigation. Also, one more thing on this. If you got to a point where you realize that there's maybe a split, half of the people are putting dog toys under dogs, half the people are putting dog toys under pet accessories, that might be a good recommendation to think, okay, maybe under pet accessories, if I don't put dog toys, I can put a link to, you know, people also purchased this, or, you know, those kind of things. Amazon's really good about doing that. They get me all the time. Because I'm like, you know what, that is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to add that to cart too. So it's a really good way to kind of feel out how everyone is thinking about your navigation. Okay, interviews. This is the last of the 5. And then we're going to move to some design tips. Interviews are kind of what they sound like, right? This is whenever you're going to ask questions around specific topics and you're going to take notes. Again, it's really good, like usability testing, to have a script so that you can kind of say, hey, I'm going to ask you some questions. There's no right or wrong answers. I'm just kind of looking for context behind, you know, XYZ that I'm trying to solve. It's really good to make this a very relaxing environment and comfortable so it doesn't feel like a quiz. I think that that can feel, you know, people want to answer right. People want to kind of have, you know, they want to be like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about for sure. And it's okay. You can kind of say, you know, if you don't know what I mean, I'm happy to explain more. And everything that you say is just going to help me out and help my website. I would typically, after I do interviews, I would create what you see here on the right, which is a persona. A persona is basically taking information about real life people and putting it into this persona, this document that's based on real life people. So we did this for a customer who is a therapist who has a lot of people that deal with anxiety, perfectionism. These typically are really high performing people. And she was trying to understand her client base and how she can help them. So we created this persona to say, okay, Scott, the engineer, you know, he does this, this, and this, and these are his goals, these are his challenges. And so now if she's ever kind of wondering, she can kind of relate better because she has this information to look back on. I love personas. I strongly suggest them. I also suggest them if you have other people involved. So maybe you have a business where you're starting to get investors. Sometimes investors have a say on how they want something to be. Sometimes that's great. We love investors, but sometimes they don't know what is best for the users. And so if you have data to go back on, you can show them, no, see, this person actually said, you can even write down quotes, right? This person even said they don't like this, this, and this. And so in that case, I'm going to challenge you on that. I think that we shouldn't go that route. And data really, really helps with kind of not making it a me versus you, but a let's work together for the client. All right. Y'all made it through all 5 steps of testing. I'm not going to lie to you guys, there's a lot of testing out there in the world that I did not cover, but those were some of the main ones and definitely the ones that I use most often. So once you've done all of the testing that your heart desires, which you don't always have to do all of them, let me make that clear. Sometimes, depending on what it is, you can just use one. Maybe you can do 2 just to kind of see which one's better for you. But whatever you've done, you're testing. You've got to analyze the data next. And the reason for this, kind of like what I was saying about personas, is that you can fall back on that data if there was ever any question about why you made a choice to go a certain direction. Or you can recognize patterns, and that's probably the biggest one, is this pattern recognition. Because if you have done all of this data and you haven't compiled it, you haven't analyzed it, you might think that you're kind of recognizing patterns as you go, but once you slap all of that stuff in a good document, all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, you know, I have this percentage, 95% of people had the exact same problem doing the exact same task. And now you have a very clear direction. This example right here was something that I was tasked with. This was a usability test, which was the one where I was watching them actually try to complete tasks. And they were trying, this was a scanner app. And this task 1, there was, I think, 5. But the first task was, can you go through the tutorial process? And only 3 of the 9 were able to find the tutorial process because it was kind of hidden in this like secondary navigation. And for some reason, only one user actually had a tutorial banner at the bottom pop up for them, which is really, really weird, but it's good to know. And so I was able to create this and then give them a recommendation so that the tutorial, if you're a first-time user, shows up on the homepage for you so that you can really easily access it. And it can be on that banner. And just swap that out with the weird thing that was showing up, which was bug fixes, which if you're a first-time user, I don't care about bug fixes. Like, how do I use this thing? I need to know that. All right. Now we're getting to the design part, which I know is what is the most fun. Let's be honest, it is. Research, unless you love research, that's not everybody's cup of tea. I totally get it, but necessary. It's a necessary cup of tea. So the fourth step, and I put begin design question mark, because depending on where you are with your brand, you have to know your branding. So do you need to change your branding as well? Because if you've done any kind of testing and you're realizing the demographic that you were going for isn't really who you thought it was, maybe you need to change your branding a little bit, and that's okay. At least now you know. So do you know your color scheme? Do you know your font, your logo, your visuals and imagery? Do you know your tone? So I'm going to be a little vulnerable here and let you guys know I have a website. I'm a user experience designer with marketing and e-commerce and web design. My website is not even fully perfect at all, actually. But I do understand as a small business owner, you are doing your best to just get all your ducks in a row, right? There's a lot going on, and sometimes you're just trying to figure it out one day at a time. And so it's okay if I'm saying this and right now you're like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. This is way too much. That's okay. You can start your website without having this all 100% figured out. But I would say at some point, get your branding figured out, because that is going to really, really help with brand recognition in the future. And a great example I have for this, I was in the other room and a Target commercial was playing. Couldn't see it. There was no words except this little funky pop song in the background. And I knew it was Target. I knew it so easily because their branding is so consistent. I can hear a song on a commercial and know who that's for. We would love to get you there, right? That would be excellent. If someone can just see one tiny little piece and be like, oh, I know that brand. Brilliant. Target is brilliant with their branding, but of course they are a big brand. So let's take things one thing at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? This on the side, these examples, this was, we do create branding kits for our clients if they need one. So we'll give them their fonts, imagery, colors. Sometimes we'll even do personas for them if that's what they need, just all the things. Hire someone who can help you with this if that feels overwhelming. Outsource it. That's okay. All right, now we're actually at design. Fifth step, design. So start with a sketch. I'm going to be your annoying English teacher, and I'm going to say you can't write a paper without a first draft. And I know we all just want to write the paper without the first draft because dang it, it takes time. But the first draft is really what saves your design. So what we call a wireframe is when I say a sketch. So literally get a pen or a pencil and paper and start sketching the layout, how you think you might want to have it. Do you want to have, your logo at the top and then maybe navigation, kind of like this example? Do you want your, like a block of text and then a background image spanning the whole thing? What are you kind of thinking you want for this? And this example on the bottom left, this shows how a design went from kind of a not great looking sketch to something that is so polished and beautiful, and it actually feels real. It feels like I could use that. And so we call the one that's a sketch low fidelity. That is a low fidelity mock-up, wireframe, whatever you want to call it. Then we go to this kind of in-between stage where maybe now we've transitioned to a platform. Personally, I love Figma. I think Figma is the best design platform that I've ever used because you can share it with people in live time. That was not really done before Figma. And then now after you have this kind of like medium one, you can move to this really polished version that you can send to your developer, or if you're building it yourself and developing your website, then now you have something to very clearly reference, and you're not trying to make these changes on the fly, because that can feel overwhelming. All right, so why is this, what is going on here? I don't know why my Figma is breaking, but I might exit. One moment. Why is it doing this? All right. I need my notes. It's not showing me my notes. Nope, it's still not. It's okay. We'll work with it. This is the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. So there's a lot of UX and UI tips out there in the world. I've given you guys some resources at the end because there's 7 trillion. But I want to give you guys some really, really specific ones just to kind of help if you're doing this. Some of them might be obvious. If you're doing any kind of clickables like a link, for example, make sure that the link is saying exactly where to go. This one, bad example. We don't want just click here. We want to know, where are you taking me? I want to know where I'm going. And then if you click it and it takes you somewhere and then you come back, make sure it changes color so that it kind of gives a visual cue. Oh yeah, I clicked that one. Now I remember. For a button, give really clear copy. And when I mean copy, I mean this kind of text. So same with the link. And also, if you can, have some kind of feedback. So you see how it has the hover? That's feedback. That's telling me, hey, you're about to click this. I also really am kind of old school in the way that I like buttons to look like buttons. So in this example, can I click that? I can't, maybe, you know, it does say join now. That's a call to action, right? But this one, it's got that drop shadow underneath. It kind of changes color when I hover. I know I can click that. All right. Spacing is another really, really big one when it comes to UX and UI. We like to space things in pixels of 4. So when you're working with design, pixels are a big thing. That's kind of the measurement. So we like to do it in 4. So in this example, you can tell that there's 36 pixels here on the top and on the bottom. And I kind of keep it similar right here. And then everything's kind of in these like clean rows and columns. That is a rule that you might break, and that's okay. I don't want this to be, you have to do everything exactly spaced so perfectly. Sometimes my designs aren't, because it kind of depends on the design. I mean, it depends on exactly what you're doing in that moment. So use this to your kind of discretion, but definitely keeping it clean. If it's a little bit off and it's not intentional, even if you don't have an eye of a designer, you might have this weird uneasy feeling. You're like, what is going on here? Let me make this bigger. There we go. And white space is a good thing. Leave a little bit of white space. It's kind of breathing room. I feel like I've just been talking so fast this whole time. I need white space right now. I need to like breathe a little bit. It kind of gives people this opportunity to absorb your content and really have the eyes rest and move around the space. Okay, text. I hope this hasn't been in the way. This is in my way. Make this smaller. Text, there's a lot of information on this one as well, because text is really important, because that's how we're conveying a lot of these messages. Images, of course, but text is how you really get a lot of the information across that can't just be done in a snap. Font size, no smaller than 14-point font. If you're working with a demographic that maybe doesn't always have the best eyesight for whatever reason, I would make that larger, 16-point font at least. Ensure headlines and subheaders are tagged appropriately. This is also an SEO tip. I don't want to get into the weeds of that. We also do SEO, but basically there should be like one title, and then kind of make sure that all of your headers, your subheading titles are in order. Text should always be easy to read. Like check for your resizing, check for devices. And what I mean by that is, if you're on desktop and you can read it, can you read it if it's in mobile? I am honestly notorious for doing this because I want to like design it and I'm like, this looks great. And then my co-founder is always like, Lex, you gotta fix the mobile design because now the text is overlapping. And I'm like, oh, you're right. So this is an example of what to do and what not to do, right? Even if it looks good on one device, check the other device because it might overlap and now you have readability issues. So there's a couple of examples that I gave on how to fix that. You can totally do it with bold text with a nice background, whatever works for your design. Make sure your fonts match all your other branded items. That's kind of the same with branding. So if you have a brochure, your text should match on your website too, your fonts. Use color or size for hierarchy. So to kind of see where the eye moves, instead of caps or italics. If you use all caps, it can feel like really abrasive sometimes, and it's actually harder to read. And same with italics, it can be harder to read. Bold is typically okay, but I would say make sure that you can read it really, really well, because if not, it's just going to cause frustration. Make sure your copy, which your text, is really, really short. Make sure it's really to the point, but that it makes sense, of course. And I don't mean short as in like literally the paragraph is short. I also mean this way as well. So even on my examples, people kind of like to scan. If this text went all the way to the end, we would maybe even like lose our place and feel discombobulated. So make it short, make it so that you can just kind of like scan really quickly. And also, if you can, make it a 5th grade reading level. A lot of times we know so much about our industry that we kind of know this industry jargon, but not everyone does. And we want to be inclusive to every single person. So even the beginner, try and make this so simplified that anyone would understand it, because you want to have your clients feel included and comforted when they come to your site and not feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. This is too confusing for me. All right. Feedback. I kind of hinted on feedback, I believe, a little bit earlier, but what this is anytime the platform website application communicates back to you, it's giving you feedback. Remember how earlier I said, this is actually a conversation. It might not feel like it because you're interacting with this sort of stagnant platform, but if you upload something and it gives you the success, your image has been uploaded. Now I'm aware, cool, I took an action, it was received, I'm good to move on. If that didn't happen, I would be like, do I need to upload it again? What is going on? I don't really understand what's happening here. That actually happened to me yesterday, and I was requesting a password reset. It never gave me feedback that it was sent. So when I opened my email, I no joke had like 15 password reset things, and it locked me out of my account. So give feedback for when a customer or a client takes an action. If they're filling out a form and they make a mistake, tell them exactly what happened. Don't just say error, say, hey, your password isn't 10 characters and it needs to be. Now I know exactly where and what the problem is and I can fix it. If you're doing any kind of buttons, make sure that, again, they're really clear. And then if you have, let me actually back up. It's not just the buttons. If you go to delete something and you have this kind of pop-up, and that's this example here with, are you sure you want to delete? All changes will be lost. That is very clear. I'm aware if I delete this, all my changes will be lost. Now, this is what we call a secondary button. It's off on the side. It's not, this is kind of like the primary movement we make is like, yeah, just get out of it. Sure, yes. So here I've actually switched it up where I said, yes, delete is over here because that is a destructive action. The primary button, which is the one that has the most contrast, it's most visually, like I'm aware of that button, that says no, go back. I'm very clear on the action. It's giving me feedback that this action will be taken if you continue. Same with hovering, that's feedback telling you kind of where your mouse is. And I know these are kind of small, but any kind of loading bars or loading circles, those are great because it can tell you, how long am I going to be sitting here, right? My time is valuable. I want to know that I have an hour remaining so I can go do something else in the time I have to wait. Okay, and then these are just resources. So we are reaching the end of me babbling. These are resources that I can send out if anyone would want them. And I think I have 2 of these. Yep. And there's just all kinds of information here, like really, really good websites that I even use to this day. All right. Whew. Questions. I know that was a lot of information. If anyone has questions, please feel free to ask me now. Or if you don't want to speak up, I'm going to give information here. I'll just do it on the next slide so that you can reach out to me separately. So I'm going to stop talking for a second and see if anyone has questions.
Fantastic, Alexis. Thank you so much. Fantastic presentation. If anybody has questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can unmute. We already have some coming through, so I can ask them for you.
Okay.
Resource slides will be sent out. We'll make sure if you can screenshot right now. If not, we'll get that out to you all afterwards as well. Question here, how much time should a beginner spend on research and how much time for UI? Because for me, a week or less for research is not something they can manage with their time. So they're trying to think about implementation.
That's a good question. And I would say that's a little bit difficult to answer because it depends on the research you're doing. Because, for example, if you're doing a interview, you're going to have to make sure that you can get your time on someone else's calendar. And it's kind of on you to like work with them because they're almost doing you a favor, right? So I would say if you're doing 3 to 5 participants, normally you can knock out 1 interview usability test, card sorting exercise in an hour or less. And so if you can get everyone, that 1 week, then sure, that can be a week that you can do it. I would say if you are on a really, really tight timeline, you can book just 3. I would say 3 is the minimum to get really good information. 5 is the minimum if you can spare it. I know that time is really tough sometimes. But yeah, get on their calendar as quickly as possible. And I guess, is the question more like a week is just too much? Is that kind of what the question is?
I think it's with limited bandwidth. So how can you do the best research with limited bandwidth?
That's a good question because it's time consuming and I get it. So I would just say, yeah, book as many as you can, close as possible. And then if you can only do 3, that is better than nothing. Heck, if you can do 1, that is better than nothing because at least you're getting someone else's opinion other than your own. And so do as many as you can. You can do the data analysis very quickly if you would like. I tend to do it in a couple of hours. So that's what I would say. Again, 1 is better than nothing. So hope that helped.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alexis. Any other questions in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute? I would say, Alexis, you mentioned some software platforms that you use in the chat, some Mobin and Balsamic. Are there any other programs or platforms you would recommend for folks to check out?
So a lot of them can be pretty intense if you're not familiar with any kind of UX design. So I would say for me, I've used Adobe before, and I liked it, Adobe XD. I love Figma. I'm a big Figma person. Now, if you get into the weeds with Figma, it can be really complicated, but I have people who have worked under me who are new college hires or maybe even just got a certificate. So they don't actually have the skills of the Figma site. They just know a little bit about UX and they've been able to jump in and use the basics of it. So let me actually go back. Can I go back? My favorite design tools, I do have Figma for wireframing and mockups. That's the one I'm going to recommend. If you do any logos or graphics, I would say Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Firefly if you need AI images. I recently discovered that one. I've been using it a lot. Of course, Photoshop is good. I use ChatGPT if I need to come up with base copy. Edit it always so that it fits you. But if you're kind of struggling coming up with content and text, I like to have that as a starting point. And then if you need Canva for graphics, that's a good one as well. So I know that's a lot and that's a lot of things to learn too. But if you just need one, I would do Figma.
Fantastic. Thank you. And as this was a foundational kind of introductory space, we definitely highly recommend for you all to reach out. If you want to go back to your contact slide, I
Yeah.
think up. Any last kind of like, if you're really digging into this, what are like the top 3 things you should know from your presentation? Let's recap.
Okay, the top 3 things. Do at least some research. I think that's really important. Do something that aligns with you and your project. Then know your customers and know your brand. And if all you can do is look into demographics and just make sure that your branding's up to date, that's better than nothing. I know, again, Rome was not built in a day. Even my own business, we're doing things as they come. I get it. And then lastly, check out, UX tips. Again, those resources are great to look at because there's some things that you would think are common knowledge, but when you really get into it, you can learn a lot just from Googling, user experience design tips. And so do the research, know your brand and your clients, and when you're designing, use these design tips to help guide you.
Fantastic, Alexis. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all so much for joining us. You'll be getting an email within an hour or so for some feedback. Highly recommend that you fill that out so we can have more fantastic sessions like this. Thank you, Alexis, again, and to Rex Marketing and CX for sharing this content. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. You should receive the recording and the slides by early next week. Thank you.
Thank you.